Greetings, friends. I'm James. Welcome to yet another very special Nostalgia Talk bonus. I had a lot of fun last month doing my Colleagues Remember Richard Hunt video. And of course, I also, again, want to thank Marty Robinson, Norman Stiles, and Louise Gold for coming back to Nostalgia Talk and celebrating such a wonderful performer. And I was like, I think I want to do this with a lot of other Muppet people. And this is a really, really good time to right now, as you saw on the title, celebrating Jerry Juhl. For anybody who doesn't know who Jerry Juhl was, he was a longtime Muppet writer. He was the head writer for The Muppet Show, Fraggle Rock. He wrote a lot of classic Muppet specials. Odds are, if you're a Muppet fan, about 80% of what you've watched was written by Jerry Juhl. He did occasional writing for Sesame Street when it started, actually creating this guy, Super Grover. He wrote a few of the first Muppet movies, like the original Muppet movie, Muppet Treasure Island, Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppets from Space, and was a puppeteer as well. He did some skits. In addition to writing, he did some skits for The Ed Sullivan Show as a puppeteer, and is perhaps best known as Taminella Grinderfall, the witchiest witch of them all, from Tales of the Tinkerbell and the Frog Prince. Jerry, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but today's a day about celebrating Jerry just by being as silly as possible. And who better to join us for that than two previous Nostalgia Talk guests, one of who worked directly with the Muppets, another one who worked on Fraggle Rock. And so for the first part of this Celebrating Jerry Juhl retrospective, I'm very happy to welcome back Craig Shemin.
Hello, how are you? It's good to see
Quite
you,
well,
James.
it's really good to see you again. So
Well, it's great to be here.
for anybody who doesn't know or doesn't remember from when Craig was on Nostalgia Talk 2 years ago, Craig is the president of the Jim Henson Legacy and wrote for Wubulous World of Dr. Seuss, wrote some Muppet Online pieces. He is the author of this book, Sam and Friends, the story of Jim Henson's first television show,
Also available in softcover.
with a sequel coming out, or out, depending on when everybody's watching this. If you're watching this after, the new one is now out. And I remember when you came on the Nostalgia Talk last time, you did. I feel like we did talk a little bit about working with Jerry Juhl. Do you remember the first time that you ever met him?
I think I met him for the first time. Um, that's a good question. I think it was at some sort of event or because Jerry spent most of his time in Northern California and he would, write from there. He would fax things over and stuff. So I'm trying to think if I met him. I think I probably met him. Oh, it would have been before uh, the Muppets at Walt Disney World because I was down there for that. It was probably for some sort of event in New York. Um, and at that time, I was working in the public relations department. So I would be writing character interviews, and usually those interviews would get approved. If it was a Miss Piggy thing, Frank would have the final say on it. But I do recall sending some of the stuff to Jerry just to get a look at it because Jerry was not a full-time staff member. He would do projects. I think at one time he was a member of the staff, but he sort of pulled back and, his attitude was like, well, if you need me to look at stuff, send it over. And but I didn't start working with him regularly until after Jim passed away. And then because that was um, a little after that when things were moving around and I got the gig as the New York staff writer and I had um, more involvement with him. And I worked with him um, directly in the first time, I think, on the Muppet Moments spots that we did for Good Morning America.
Okay. Do you remember when you met him for the first time, what your first ever thoughts of him were?
Oh, I just thought he was amazing. I mean, he was a very friendly, very gregarious, and very funny guy. And he just he could have this little glint in his eye when something amused him and if you could get him to giggle or laugh, you just felt amazing because you know that this is the guy who had done so many things. And I wanted, I would just want to hear things from him. And he would teach me so many things. I remember first time we were working on the Muppet Moments, and I wrote up a bunch of scripts um, for these were 2 minute, roughly 2 minute spots we did for Good Morning America. And we were trying to figure out what they were. And I was working on them. Excuse me, Jim Lewis and Jerry Juhl was the head writer. And I would, I remember we had meetings in New York for it, and we all sort of went off and wrote our own stuff. And then he came in right before he was going to head out to the airport. And I said, "Oh, I have a batch of stuff for you." So I gave him some scripts, and then he left. And a half hour later, I get a call, and he's at the airport, and he'd already read the material. He read it in the car, and it was like the best advice he ever gave me, but he did it in a funny way. He's like, "Hey, Craig, I just got to tell you, you write really great radio." And it was his way of saying that the scripts were not visually and Muppety enough. It didn't have enough visual stuff going on. And that's like the thing that I take with me to this day. If I'm working on something for Muppets, I'm always wondering. It's like, is this too much radio? And Frank had a different way of saying it. When he would do, and he would look at scripts, he would always say, "Do you need the Muppets to do this?" So the combination of keeping it visual and making sure it's Muppet, that's like what every Muppet writer really needs to keep in mind. And from that point on, Jerry, Jim Lewis and I worked together on some stuff, and we just for fun, we wanted to do some Statler and Waldorf things. So Jim and I just wrote Statler and Waldorf setups, and we sent them to Jerry, and it's like, "Here, we did the hard part. Now you do the punchlines." And you just scribbled like, some expletives on it and faxed it back.
It's funny, I was talking to Bob Stutt, who performed on Fraggle Rock yesterday, and we were talking about the big difference between Muppets Now versus Muppets Then. Frank Oz, of course, always puts it best when he says that the Muppets Now are not as they're still cute, but they're not as rebellious as they used to be.
Yeah, and I think that sort of comes from an organic state of mind. Um, I think that uh, you look at when Jerry was growing up, and when Jim and then they had sort of shaped their work throughout the 1960s. Sam and Friends ended, 1961 or so, and that decade of there was so much going on, protests and war and I think the Muppets sort of developed out of that period of time. And the what made the Muppet Show work is that it was sort of like you got the feeling that this was a group of people that were rejected by all of these networks, and they're still doing the show on their own. So there's that element of being on the outside and being rebellious. But I think it has to, it sort of has to come organically. I remember, um, I think it was Jim Lewis that told me that when 1989, the first time that the Muppets were going to get purchased by Disney, the deal that eventually did not go through. Um, Disney invited a whole bunch of people from Muppets to this sort of big meeting. I think it was at Disney World, and I was not at a level where I got an invite to this. But Jim Lewis went down. He said they sort of got the vibe from David Katzenberg, who was saying, "And we want you to be as irreverent as you've ever been." And it's just sort of an irony of the corporate owner saying, "Now be irreverent." And it's sort of like, well, that's sort of not what a reverence is. It's sort of, it has to come naturally. It's not, it can't be mandated from corporate overlords. We want you to be irreverent. Then it sort of takes away the organic nature of that.
Hmm. So when you started, it was around the time of Jim Henson's final years, and so you were this like new Muppet person, and then you understood it enough to become a regular Muppet writer.
Mhm.
And as you said, Jerry gave you some advice as to how to write for it. Did you guys collaborate much together?
Well, directly, that was the big one. It was the Muppet spots for Good Morning America, and then you know we would we would collaborate indirectly, like when they were doing Muppet Christmas Carol, and there was like an offshoot. They wanted an adaptation of Muppet Christmas Carol for a magazine, I think, and I was writing that, so I had to sort of work with Jerry on sort of distilling the elements of the script into this, 1,000, 1,500 word story or something. So we would go back and forth and work on stuff like that, and then we worked together on a bunch of historical things. The first time we did the Muppets Music and Magic retrospective screenings at BAM, Jerry was involved in selecting a lot of those clips. So we worked on editing that together, and then we presented it together. And that was it was great because he had a point of view that no one else really could have, because he was not just evaluating it based on the content, but he remembers doing those things on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he could tell these great stories about, they were doing, um, I think it was Java, and the ending of Java involves the one character shooting the other character, and it's done with a fire extinguisher. And Jerry said that one time they were doing it on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they're, you know, about to go on, and they come down from the dressing room, which is, on the eighth floor or wherever on the Ed Sullivan Theater, and they come down, come down in the elevator, and they get to the stage, and they're waiting to be introduced, and they realize they didn't bring the fire extinguisher from the dressing room.
Oh my God.
And they had, I think like either Frank or Jerry like raced up, and then, it's one of those old rickety elevators that has a person operating it, and it's going and you know and Ed Sullivan's introducing the act, and they start it, and Jerry's like running to get the fire extinguisher and gets back to the stage just in time to like pull the trigger. And he's like, they didn't know what they were going to do because they had no ending if Jerry couldn't get back in time with the fire extinguisher.
God, that's crazy.
Yeah. So he was the one having those stories. And I wish, at one point, I know Jerry was talking about writing a book, and I don't know how much of it he did. I know he was pitching it around to publishers, and wasn't really getting interest.
Like a book
Um,
about his experiences
yeah,
working with the
yeah,
Muppets?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what exists, if anything, as far as that's concerned. But he, he really loved his time working with Jim. And he remembered vividly, the first days coming. He was kind of annoyed because he was hired. Everyone probably, a lot of the Muppet fans know the story that Jim was impressed by Frank Oz's performance at this puppetry festival, but Frank wasn't old enough. So Jerry was. So he sort of got hired by default. And Jerry went to Washington, moved from Northern California, and he was hired to work on Sam and Friends. And he gets to Washington, and Sam and Friends is canceled. So he only
Oh,
gets like 13 weeks of Sam and Friends, but then he stays and does all of these other things. But the main purpose he was hired for didn't exist anymore. But they still were doing tons of commercials. And then he moved up with he did the move to New York and did lots of variety shows and stuff like that. But he remembered arriving in Washington, and he was staying with Jim and Jane for a few weeks. And then he realized he wanted to get his own apartment. So he asked uh, Jim if he could take a few hours to go around for an apartment and borrow a car to go apartment hunting. And Jim said, "Yeah, sure, take the rolls. It hasn't been out of the driveway in a couple of weeks." So Jerry's driving around trying to find, a $50 a month basement apartment, driving a Rolls Royce. So he would get to the neighborhood where the apartments were, and he'd have to park like 3 or 4 blocks away because he didn't want the landlords to see him coming up, driving in a Rolls Royce and trying to get the cheapest apartment in the world. But that was like, Jim just thought it would be fun, take the rolls.
Well, you brought up Sam and Friends and a lot of the commercials. Actually, speaking of those early Henson commercials, I got all dressed up for this occasion. I don't know how much of this will be visible.
Ah, yeah. Oh, yes.
I don't know if Jerry wrote the gags for the Wilkins coffee commercials. I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
He probably contributed to some of the later ones because they continued doing those commercials well into the 60s for different products.
Oh yeah, that's right. They kind of use the same gags. Like so, for example, it would be like, "Hey, what do you think of Wilkins coffee?" "Oh, I
Yeah.
don't like Wilkins." And then another
Yeah,
guy
and
would
they would
probably
do it
get
for,
murdered. And then it would
yep.
be like, "What do you think of
Then
Red
they
Diamond coffee?" "Don't
exactly
like it."
Cramel milk. Calso water was the one that Frank Oz would see up in Northern California. So all of these, and they kept on, Frank worked on them, Jerry worked on them into the mid 60s. They kept on making them.
Hmm. So with Sam and Friends, we were earlier talking about the books you've put out about Sam and Friends. I'm still gonna keep plugging it.
I appreciate it.
Go check out the new one. That one, the new one you have coming out, or out again, depending on when everybody's seeing this, is more so focusing on the scripts for the show. And writing was, of course, after puppeteering, Jerry realized his true forte was in writing. What were some of his contributions to Sam and Friends as a writer?
Well, there are two scripts in the book,
Okay.
and
And the reason I ask is because, as a lot of us Muppet fans know, for the most part, Sam and Friends is the puppets just lip syncing to pre-recorded records, and then comes time for them to use their own voices.
right, right. So most of they still were doing lip syncs and things, and some of the scripts were wraparounds to lip sync performances, but they started to do really elaborate sketches, and the two that Jerry Juhl uh, did that are in the book. One of them is very familiar because it's a soft shoe song and dance. Um, and the whole bit is very similar to the what later became At the Dance. So
Oh,
it
wow.
was, yeah, I think it was Kermit and the Sam and Friends version of Mildred, and they would do a little soft shoe, and then they would break, and there would be a joke, and then they'd do a soft shoe, and the whole thing was formatted as sort of a vaudeville song and dance number. But it was basically a joke delivery system in the same way that At the Dance was. So it's really funny to see what things evolved to. And I think the other script was a wraparound for the song Pakalafika, which was then later done on the Muppet Show as well. And it was sort of the premise was that they were there was an exploration. There was a character who was an explorer, and there was an interview, and it sort of led into Pakalafika. But it was two fun examples, from the last 13 weeks. Just Jerry had already started writing some of this material. So I think we were able to identify, I think just two scripts from Jerry are in the book, I believe.
Okay. So, when you came on the podcast last time, you had mentioned that you were always a big Muppet fan before joining the Muppets. And like I said, a lot of the early Muppet stuff was written by Jerry. A lot of the specials, a lot of the variety show appearances, a lot of the classic skits that we all know from Ed Sullivan's show, like Business Business. I'm pretty sure that was Jerry Juhl's writing.
I think so. And also, I think we identified him performing on the track as well, on the audio track,
On
um,
Sam and Friends?
on the business audio.
Yeah, well, I recognized his voice.
Yeah,
Actually, they rerun Ed Sullivan's show on TV, and I turned it on, and it lists off who's going to be on it. It says the Muppets, and it was actually Business Business, and rewatching that actually made me want to do
And
this video.
yeah, and recently we had to go back and find that track because Puppet Up wanted to do Business Business as a recreation. And they built the puppets. They built new versions of the Business Business puppets with the moving eyeballs and everything. And they didn't want to perform it to the Ed Sullivan track because it had all the laughter and the ambient noise. So Carla Della Vedova, who is the media archivist working with Karen Falk at Henson, we had to go back and try and find the audio tape of Business Business, and it was not that easy because it was originally it was had a different name,
Oh
and
wow.
yeah, and sort of had to go back and find what the different name was and search under that, and that's how they located the tape and had it transferred and restored. So
So what
that's
what was it originally named?
I don't remember the name of it offhand, but
Okay.
it was stored under the original name and not Business Business.
That's crazy.
That's
Wow.
why I always tell people that Jim did a great job of saving all of this material so we could, use it and write books about it. But he
Plug
sort of
again.
just, yeah, he was not the best at labeling it. So, there would be things in the archives under old productions or, old Muppet bits, and you don't know what's on it. So sometimes you just have to pull it out of storage and have it transferred, and then sometimes we get surprises.
It's crazy. And of course, he also did the Tales from Muppet Land specials.
Yep.
And
And
like I
Emmett
said,
Otter.
oh yeah,
The
that's right. That was one of my
yeah,
father's favorites.
yeah, Emmett Otter is one of his real masterpieces. And I remember calling him up because I was doing a documentary about Emmett Otter when it was first being put on DVD. It wasn't first put on DVD, but it was for the first major release. And it was challenging because it was right after the Disney purchase of the Muppet characters, so Kermit couldn't be in the Emmett Otter thing, and and Jerry was just really really upset about that, and he was playful, and I asked him, I asked him to be in the documentary, and he's like, "Oh, I would do it for you in a minute, but without Kermit, it's just like that's my way of protesting. It just and it's just it's a shame because uh, years later, when legal issues were um, resolved and Kermit was put back into the show, and that's how people can experience it now. But when we made the documentary, I couldn't get Jerry to do it because of Kermit's absence from the show.
Hmm. So with all of these early Muppet things and you being a Muppet fan from the get-go, maybe not necessarily a Jerry Juhl question, more of a question about you. Do you remember some of your early exposures to the Muppets? And the reason I ask is because, like I said, a good chunk of it was probably written by Jerry.
Oh yeah. Well, I was in that sort of first Sesame Street graduating class. I was born in 1966, which seems like, an eons ago for you. But so I was 3 when Sesame Street went on the air. So I remember watching it all
Mhm.
the time. And Ernie and Bert were my favorites, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
And
Jerry wrote a lot of those
yeah,
too.
a
Like
lot of those
for
early Ernie and Bert's,
yeah,
and
for a lot of
that
our
first.
listeners who don't know, you probably would be interested to know that Jerry also wrote Bert's song about the letter W.
Yep. And so the first 5 years is really when Jerry was there all the time on Sesame Street. He would continue to contribute from time to time, but you know, the Ernie and Bert segments in those first 5 seasons were just really fun, and they could do, can really be playful and a little anarchistic, and then when the Muppet Show came out. I was 10 years old. So again, when I'm in the middle of formulating my senses of humor and story, and I was really responding to the Muppets. And I was one of those kids who this was before you had the internet. So I would go to the library and I would um, look up magazines. There was a great magazine article in New York Times Sunday Magazine about the Muppets. There was Time Magazine, American Cinematographer when the Muppet movie came out, and I was going and copying all of these microfilm newspaper articles. We used to have a thing called a microfilm reader back in the day, and the newspapers would all be photographed on microfilm, little strips of actual film, and you would go to the library and you'd tell them what newspaper you wanted, and they'd give you a little roll, and you'd put it in the thing, and you could watch on the screen. It would just you'd have a little wheel to move it, and you find your newspaper thing, and then there was usually if it was a good library, there was a little button you could push, and it would make a little copy of that page. So you could make that copy and then you take them up and then they'd say, oh, you have, 8 copies. That's 10 cents each. And you pay your 80 cents and you could get all of these old newspaper and magazine
10
articles.
cents each. Now it'd be $10
I
each.
know it was a wonderful thing. So that, a shout out to the Morris County Library in New Jersey um, and the Rockaway Township Public Library. But I remember many hours were spent in the Morris County Library researching the Muppets because that's how you had to do it then.
Hmm.
Um, so I knew who Jerry Juhl was when I was, 11, 12, 13. Um, and, you know, I just really loved watching the Muppet Show. And when my family got its first VCR, my brother was working for a video store, so he got us a VCR. My parents went on to later open a video store, so I had access to all of these tapes.
Oh yeah,
But
that's right. I remember you'd mentioned to me that your parents had a video
yeah,
store. I forgot about that.
um, but at this time, okay, you know, your listeners and will have to take my word for it, but videotapes were incredibly expensive when you're, an 11, 12-year-old kid. Um, and uh, one 2-hour videotape cost like 13 or $14. And you could stretch that out to 6 hours by changing the speed. So I think I could afford like one or two or three videotapes, and I would record the Muppet Show on it. And I would record like the different things that would come on. And once in the Muppet Show time slot, they showed the Michael Parkinson interview with the Muppets. Um, and they called it Parkinson Interviews the Muppets, and they just put it on as an extra episode in that slot. And I remember taping it, and a lot of the other stuff I would, the Muppet shows would I would tape it, watch it, and tape it over. But I saved that Parkinson thing. And when I first started doing presentations of the Jim Henson Legacy, that was the version of Parkinson that I had because, there were no other tapes available. So I would use the clip from my little old VHS tape. Um, but yeah, so I remember all of these sketches, and like early on, I just like the Fozzie with Beverly Sills, and I remember there was a thing where Sam did a science bit where they were looking under uh, microscopic organisms under a microscope, and they had Kermit the protozoa and Fozzie
Fozzie the
Amoeba.
Amoeba.
Yeah. And I just thought this was the funniest thing I'd ever seen.
Hmm.
So a lot of that was fueling, you know, my personal comic sensibilities. And then, and still to this day, it's like I always tell people my main three influences as a writer are the Muppets, um, and Jim Henson and Jerry Juhl, and Billy Wilder, and
Yeah, Stephanie made me a big Billy Wilder fan.
yeah, and Jack Benny. And there are a lot of similarities with Jack Benny and the Muppets.
Hmm. So with the Muppet Show, that's
Mhm.
actually a great lead into my next question. I have a copy of the Muppet Show seasons on DVD. Of course, now all five are streaming on Disney Plus, so we no longer have to.
Most of them.
True, yeah. Well, most of the episodes, yeah, but for the most part, all 5 seasons are now streaming on Disney Plus. So after 15 years of waiting for seasons 4 and 5, we now can enjoy them. Unless you've got the Time Life VHS tapes, which I do. But I also have the season DVDs, and one of the things I really like about the season one DVD, it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of Muppet Show retrospectives. Like last year, I did a retrospective on the Halloween episodes, like Liza Minnelli, Alice Cooper, Vincent Price, and all those ones. And of course, two of those, Vincent Price and Twiggy, were from season one, and then goes right to the next season. And it's really interesting to think about how it changed under the supervision of Jack Burns to then Jerry Juhl. And with the DVD release of season one, what I really, really like about it is the pop-up facts, Muppet Morsels.
Yep, I did those.
Yeah, and I understand that Jerry was involved in those too.
Oh yeah, I would we reached out to Jerry, both Jim and myself. Um Jim and I did the
Are you talking about Jim Lewis?
Jim Lewis.
Okay.
Jim Lewis and I did the intros for the Odyssey channel that
Oh
I think they
yeah.
ended up using on Time Life as well, with
Hmm.
Brian Henson's intros. So Jim did some of them, I did some of them. And I remember we would reach out to Jerry to get stories. We talked to Jerry, we talked to
Ooh.
David Laser.
Getting dirt on the Muppets.
Well, just like little anecdotes and stuff. But I did reach out to Jerry when I did the pop-up morsels. And, I can't remember any specific things that he said, but every once in a while he would, offer a thing. And the whole thing with Jack Burns, it's just a different sensibility. And I think
Yeah.
Jack Burns is coming into it as a comedian because
Hmm.
they first met. Frank Oz told me recently that they first met Jack Burns when they were doing Our Place, a show, summer replacement show that Ed Sullivan's company produced. And Rolf was the host, and Burns and Schreiber were sort of the regulars. Uh, and that's when they met Jack Burns. And Jim had a tendency to sort of collect collaborators as he would move forward.
Right.
And on that one, they stayed in touch, and Jack Burns eventually joined up. And I think it was really because in the very beginning of the Muppet Show, they wanted someone uh, running the writing who had more experience and doing variety show television. And at that point, Jack Burns had been on television a long time. He did the Andy Griffith Show, and he did a lot of things, a lot of times with his partner Avery Schreiber, who also showed
Later
up
was
on
a
the
guest
Muppet
on the
Show.
Muppet Show. Yeah.
Um, so I think that it was, I think it was sort of, I don't want to say a mandate, but it was a strong suggestion that they have Jack Burns run the show.
Hmm.
And I believe it just, he was doing it from more of a joke mentality.
Yeah,
And
because like I look at those early episodes, and you've got the opening numbers, which usually were really, really goofier than the opening numbers on the Muppet Show later. The guest spot, maybe something in between all of those, maybe at the dance, the talking houses, and everything really just felt really cluttery as
well,
the
and I
Muppet
think
Show.
that it did, but you have to look at it compared to other variety shows. And I think that when you
Yeah.
see like the talk spot with Kermit, and that's sort of a holdover from variety shows.
Hmm.
If you look at the old Dinah Shore show, there'd be a talk spot, and there would be a talk spot with the Smothers Brothers and their guests. And it sort of, I think that when Jerry took over, they could go a little further in terms of what the craziness backstage was happening,
Yeah, it felt
and
more
then
like a sitcom.
yeah, it sort of it was more driven out of character,
Hmm.
and the characters drove the situations, and the situations, could get really weird because of the characters. So you could have the show at a train station, or you can have Gonzo decide to do a dance marathon, and you can really push it like that. And I think the first season is like this is a variety show
Hmm.
because they had no real. I don't think there was that sort of character-driven variety show before. I mean, you could argue that Dean Martin was kind of like that because Dean had this drunken character, and a lot of that was sort of driving the show. But you know, it's like because you really didn't have like you didn't have Beaker until season two,
Hmm.
um, and I don't think you had Pigs in Space until season two.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So
right. Yeah, because I watched some of the season one Muppet shows getting ready for this, and I always love the Muppet Lab skits. Those are among some of my
mhm.
favorites. I usually always like to watch one that has a Muppet Lab skit. Of course, the infamous gorilla detector. What's the
Right,
big difference
exactly.
with that? No Beaker. I mean,
Exactly. And
but
that's
but
the
it would be
thing.
so
It's like,
different if it was with Beaker, though.
yeah. Well, you could, I think they realize we need someone to sort of, I don't like to say torture, but when
No, go
you
ahead.
could do
Louise Goldeneye
funny
used that
things
term the
with,
other
you
day.
could do funny things too. And it just helped. And that sort of those characters developed in such a really fun way because Dave, who had a background working with scientists like this, could really form Bunsen, in a very unique way.
Hmm. So to wrap it up, did Jerry have a favorite Muppet of his own? Like, do you know if he had a character he
I
really enjoyed
don't
writing
know.
for?
He might. We never really discussed it, but
Okay.
I think that he had a great fondness um, for all of them. But I think that there was all Muppet writers love to write for Miss Piggy, and I think that he enjoyed that. Um, and I couldn't tell you what his favorite character was. Someone, there may be an interview with him where he talks about it. Um, but if he's talked about it, I don't remember it. I mean,
I'm
I
sure
know
maybe
that
there's something out there. Yeah, who knows?
I will say I remember, uh, you know, the thing is when you look at the stuff that Jim and Jerry did together, you see a wonderful, um, a, this wonderful relationship, um, and I think that a lot of that, you know, they were having so much fun doing this,
Mhm.
and what survives on the screen, I think, the reason that people still enjoy this material is because it was done with fun and love. And, these are characters who are driving each other crazy in a very affectionate way. Because if they were really, why would Kermit keep this group together when, all of these people are doing wild and insane things?
I read in the Muppet Morsels that one of Jerry and Jim's favorite lines together was one from the Muppet Show that was about Kermit. It's like, you're the only one who's not crazy. Me not crazy. I hired all the others.
Yep, exactly. And, uh, you know, the story that always resonates with me, and Jerry told me this years ago when he was watching during a read through, and I think it was like either a vet's hospital or something along those lines, and he um there was one of the really awful jokes delivered, and it gets a big groan, and um and then afterwards he asked Jim about it, and it's like that joke, should we lose it? It's pretty bad. And Jim said something like, "Oh, it's an awful joke, but it's worthy of us." And that was sort of it. It's like that it all comes down to these characters would make a bad joke like that. And it's not about there's something lovable
Yeah, I
in
mean, how
this.
else would you get a 7 foot tall talking carrot mixed up with a 7 foot tall talking parrot?
Yes.
Or have a
Yeah.
cow in the backstage area that apparently belongs to the guest star? You'd think Julie Andrews would have warned Kermit, by the way, I'm bringing my cow.
Yeah, and something
Friggin'
that's like,
crazy.
and when I work on stuff, I don't work on a lot of Muppet stuff these days, but Jim Lewis and I both worked with Jerry, so we're coming to it from that sort of, we want these characters to come from the their own, come from their hearts, and to do stuff that's appropriate, but you also want it to be really silly. And um, when I wrote the character encyclopedia, and Jim Lewis was the editorial person on the Disney side, so I would send him material, and he would, we would go back and forth, and just like little things we wanted to. It's like we it's like, okay, and a lot of this was stuff that had never been established, so we were able to make up things like it Dr. Strangepork. Originally I said, well, he should come from Hamburg, Germany, because pigs and ham and stuff. And and Jim said, better, we'll have him come from Hammelburg, because that's where Stalag 13 and Hogan's Heroes was located.
I would have gone with Frankfurt because pig.
Well, that would work too.
Frankfurt.
We made Dr. Strangeport come from Hammelburg because it's Hogan's Heroes, and we're able to just sort of do things that we think that Jerry would enjoy. Um, and it was. I think the last thing, because Jim Lewis recently retired a couple of years ago,
Yeah, I read that
and
final interview with him on Tough Pigs. It was really
And the
touching.
last thing, one of the last things he did, I did with him. We wrote the material for the D23 Muppet Christmas Carol event. Disney
Hmm.
had hired me to sort of produce that, and then I worked with Jim to script the scripted elements, and it was so much fun. But we're trying to come up with, so we did the first bit in character, because we wanted to do, we had Gonzo come out as Charles Dickens. And, we're in D23. So you know, we wanted to open with a laugh. And I think I came up with the line, uh, I'm Charles Dickens, the 19th century's answer to Stan Lee. And it gets a big laugh. And Jim loved it. And we're like, oh, this is great. And, it's just, I think what Jerry established is the is really treating these characters as if they are real, but willing to take them to really extreme places. That they
Hmm.
are real, but not necessarily, they're not necessarily our version of real. They're real within their world. So uh, one of the things that Jerry told me early on is, got to remember about Muppets. When you're writing a Muppet script, it's just as easy for a Muppet to grow a second head as it is for them to answer the telephone, because it's the same production element. It's the same tape stop. If you need a Muppet to answer the telephone, you have to have the character reach for the phone. You stop tape. You tape the phone to the character's hand, and you start up again, and you pick it up. That same tape stop, you could stop tape and add another head to the character, and poof, he's blown another head. So what's the more Muppety thing to do? And that's what Jerry is always having people think about.
Hmm.
Even
And
now,
yeah, even now,
he's
it's
been
right.
gone all these years, and I'm still thinking of that.
Hmm.
What's the most Muppety thing can happen?
Hmm. Well, Craig, thank you very much for coming back to Nostalgia Talk and celebrating Jerry's
Anytime.
legacy with me.
Have I mentioned there's a new Sam and Friends book coming?
Yeah, I don't think we
It's
did
called
cover
the
that.
Sam
Yeah.
and Friends script book, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, and both books can be gotten at bearmanormedia.com, or you can go and visit samandfriendsbook.com and get
Link
all
in
of
the
the
description.
links.
Mhm.
Thank you. It's right there.
And now on to our second guest of this retrospective. He is a puppeteer who worked on Fraggle Rock. He was also the very first guest I ever had on Nostalgia Talk, and here I am now 5 years later, past 100. Let's give a big welcome back to Mike Petersen. Mike, good to see you again.
Hey, nice. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, for any of our listeners who don't know or don't remember, Mike was our very first ever guest on Nostalgia Talk 5 years ago, and now here we are past episode number 100. He is a puppeteer who has performed on Fraggle Rock, the feature film Labyrinth, Miss Persona, Tupi and Binu, and The Mighty Jungle. I almost said Into the Jungle.
No, Mighty Jungle is the name of the show, and we love it. Yep. Now you can add. I've had a couple of updates since then. You can add Go Togo to that list,
hmm
and I was a recent helper outer on the final season of Chucky.
All of which with another previous Nostalgia Talk guest who also was on Fraggle Rock, Gord Robertson.
That's right.
Mm.
Yes.
And Gord says hello, by the way.
Hello, Gord.
So, as does Bob Stutt. I just had him on recently.
Ah, hello, Bob. Yeah, you've
So
been
we're
making the rounds, James.
so we're here to talk about Jerry Juhl, who, as I mentioned in the first part of this, was the head writer for Fraggle Rock and also the Muppet Show, along with other early Muppet stuff from back in the day. Like I've said, if you're a Muppet fan, like you and I are, and I assume of our viewers and listeners are, there's a good chance that a lot of the stuff that you've watched was written by Jerry. But you came on to Fraggle Rock a little bit later in the series.
That's right. They had already been working for 2 years, and I was sort of the new kid to join in. I started on year three, and I was there for years three and four, and then that's when the series wrapped at the end of series four. So
Okay.
I kind of came in halfway through. It was already a smoothly running machine by then.
hmm So, do
Yeah.
you remember the first time? Because when I invited you to do this, like I knew from somebody who worked on Sesame Street that Jerry worked in Northern California, so I wasn't sure how often he would be actually on set. And then hearing from you, you had mentioned that he was there regularly. Do you remember the first time you ever met Jerry Juhl?
Only vaguely.
Okay.
It seems to me that he was there on an almost constant basis. Most of the producers and the puppeteers, of course, and Jerry. Plus, he had a team of writers as well. It wasn't just him writing all by himself. Jocelyn Stevenson was one of the writers, and they had a few other writers as well, sort of rotating around and sharing scripts. Jerry was the head writer, and occasionally he was a sole screenwriter.
Yeah,
It
much
seems
like
to
in
me
the
that
case of previous guests Norman Stiles and Lou Berger, they were head writers for Sesame Street, and a head writer, of course, approves of other writers' scripts.
precisely, yes, he presides over it. He's the guardian of the series Bible that has all the rules of the show in it, and that was Jerry's job. I just remember him being an almost constant presence, and I'll go all the way back to my very first day on the set, where I had walked into a room. I had my audition a couple of months previous. I had been hired, and there I was, freshly landed in Toronto, and I walk into the studio for my first day, and I'd never been anywhere before. I'm just a kid from Esquimalt. I don't know anything about anything. And I had never walked into a room before and met famous people. I walked into a room with famous people. This had never happened to me before. There's Jim Henson. There are Muppet performers who I recognize thanks to a big coffee table book that my grandmother gave to me called Of Muppets and Men. So I recognize all these faces and I knew all these names. There's Jim Henson. And sitting next to Jim was a great big guy, tall, I mean, with a cloud of white hair and glasses that made him look sort of like a social studies professor or something.
That's just such a great description.
That's kind of you'd never know looking at him, but this was Jerry Juhl, head writer, inventor of almost any Muppet joke that you can think of, and he's the one who helped Jim sculpt this three-level universe. He was the guardian of the series Bible, and he was the one who shepherded all of the characters, who all the characters are, and how the stories actually worked. Jerry Juhl was the writer of that. I just remember Jerry having a big smile on his face almost all the time. Um, and he seemed kind of humble. You'd never know that this is a genius comedy writer and a writer of some depth. If you talk to Larry Merkin about Jerry Juhl, he's a great big champion of the depth of Jerry Juhl's writing
Yeah,
and
I
how,
just recently saw Larry talk on a Zoom chat, not about Jerry, but recent, but in general, yeah.
yeah, he is a little bit worried that future generations will dismiss the value of Jerry Juhl's writing because he wrote for puppets. But he's a firm believer that Jerry Juhl actually wrote from a very deep and wise place. And I agree with Larry on that. I think that Jerry did write from a deep and wise place with humor on top, which is the genius of Jerry Juhl's writing. I remember those table reads. The reason I was there that first morning, it was Monday. We weren't shooting that day. We had a ritual read through, a table read of two scripts every Monday morning, the script for the upcoming week and the script for a week ahead. And that would give the writers time to make any changes that they wanted to make before that would start. So there we are at the table read. Jim Henson is at the head of the table presiding over the read. And I do believe the writer of that episode that I was hearing for the first time in person was Jerry Juhl himself. And so there he was. And I'll tell you, my outstanding memory of Jerry Juhl was that even though he wrote the show, knew exactly what everyone was about to say, he was laughing his head off just as hard as everyone else in the room listening to the script. Not because he was patting himself on the back about his own writing, but because the performers were always saying his lines in some unexpected new way and bringing some unexpected spark of life to what he had written, which is always a delight for any writer. I remember Jerry being just as amused and delighted by what everyone was doing as everybody else was.
That's sweet. And on the Muppet Show, especially, like he would create a lot of these gimmicks for a lot of the characters, like Gonzo's love of chickens, for example.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was him.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was him or not. I'll tell you something I started to notice with Jerry and the other writers on Fraggle was they would watch very carefully what the puppeteers were doing day to day on the floor and pick out details of what was happening uh, based on their goofing around and their improv. For example, sometimes between takes or just at the end of a take when the director says cut, the puppeteers, so they always relax, they always drop their arms and they go, oh boy. And Steve Whitmire would sometimes uh, hold Wembley out straight out like this and have his arms straight out like this and whistle John Williams' theme from Superman. He would always go, and that was Wembley. And that was just Steve goofing around, just goofing around. Well, one of the writers, probably Jerry Juhl, picked up on that idea and wrote an episode for season 4 where Wembley would have superpowers and fly through the caves. So basically, Jerry was inspired by the goofing around and the improvising of the puppeteers. And I think that happened quite a bit.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So you were a big puppet aficionado before coming into Fraggle Rock, and as you had told me before, early Sesame Street was a part of your childhood. And a
Yeah.
lot of that early Sesame Street, Craig and I were talking about this, Craig Shemin, because he likewise was a first generation Sesame Street watcher. A lot of the early Bert and Ernie stuff was written by Jerry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Bert's song about the letter W. Oh, what is the letter we love? The sound that we're extra fond of. It's not any trouble, you know it's a W when you hear woo 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 woo. That was Jerry who wrote that.
Larry, Jerry used to laugh at the various sound effects and funny gibberish that Wembley would come up with. I think he was particularly amused by Steve Whitmire and Wembley. I think Jerry is the one who would write waka 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 squiddly poink and stuff like that. You know, just making up Wembley's gibberish and Wembley's funny words.
It kind of makes me think of I did a retrospective on the 40th anniversary of Fraggle Rock, my favorite Fraggle Rock episodes. I think my favorite was Boober's dream about this character that was the total opposite of him, which was Sidebottom, and they had the solid oath of the Fraggles, which I think was Weevo Weevo Waffle Waffle Gargon Sprout Whoopee!
That's a Jerry for sure. And I
I
think,
believe that.
yep, yep. Yeah. Now I don't know everything that Jerry should be credited for, but I think the one of the simplest and most clever gags of them all is just a one-line exchange in the Muppet movie. And I think it goes like this. Bear left, right, frog.
That was used in Muppets Most Wanted as well.
Simple genius.
And in addition, Jerry was also a performer in some of those early days. He performed on Sam and Friends. He performed on The Ed Sullivan Show. He was in, I don't know if you ever saw The Frog Prince.
Oh, I saw the Frog Prince.
He
Yeah,
was
yeah.
Taminella Grinderfall, the witchiest witch of them all.
That was something I did not know.
That was like one of his, that was like his only major Muppet character, I believe.
Wow, I didn't know he was a puppeteer. You just taught me something that I did not know. I think that's neat.
Mhm. I have an album of songs from Sesame Street, and that W song is on it. It's all the letters of the alphabet, and a lot of the scripted material, because it was songs, and then there was some skits. C is for Cookie made its debut on that record. But a lot of the scripted material was written by Jerry, and there's one on the letter T. The Tale of Tom Tattertall Tuttletut,
Okay.
which
Yep.
sounds like from how you and Craig have been describing his silliness, that
Yeah.
sounds like something he would have created.
It sounds, yeah,
But it was about a
that sounds like,
queen. It was about a queen who hated the letter T. I've never liked the horrid t sound, so I hereby state that nothing beginning with the letter T will be allowed in my kingdom. That was Jerry's voice.
that was something I did not know.
Okay, well, there we go. Jerry was a puppeteer. There's a bit on the Ed Sullivan Show that actually made me want to do this video. It was called Business Business, where he and Jim Henson were performing. So there were two duos of characters, both performed by Jim and Jerry, and one duo would be like earnings up 7.2%, and just kind of talk about business and finance. And these other two Muppets would come in, joy, peace, brotherhood, much to the annoyance of the others. Um, and in that retrospective on Fraggle Rock that I mentioned one of my very favorite episodes, The Trial of Cotterpin, which you performed in. And I still have, actually, to go a little bit off subject, the DVD that features that,
Okay.
which, when I took your class about 10 years ago, you signed for me.
Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that.
I,
Oh, for
s-
heaven's sake.
I have a video of you autographing it because I was like, I need to brag to my friends that one of the Muppet performers is signing my DVD.
That's incredible. My gosh, I was Bailiff Doozer in that episode.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, here's a memory I have of Jerry Juhl. My first stab at a voice for the Bailiff Doozer sounded I accidentally started sounding a little bit like Cary Grant. I remember, now we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It was I didn't mean to sound like that, but Jerry actually sort of approached me and said, "Hey, listen, back off the Cary Grant, would you?" And so I changed the voice to something a little bit different.
Well, that actually was going to be my next question because Jerry got his start as a puppeteer
Right.
before realizing that writing was really what he was more interested in. So I was
Right.
wondering if he ever would offer advice to you on how to perform.
Yeah, no, not exactly. That was the only time that I got a specific note from Jerry was back off the Cary Grant. That I wasn't even trying to do that. Thanks for pointing that out to me. So then I altered it that way. The other couple of moments that I had with Jerry that I remember was uh I was still such a fresh kid, and I was only a couple of weeks in, and at one point I was hired to be a piece of paper falling from the ceiling. Moki was writing a poem, and a piece of paper had to tumble from the ceiling, and she had to notice it. Now, they couldn't just drop a piece of paper, it wouldn't flutter the way they wanted it to. So they actually taped a piece of paper to a long rod, and I puppeteered the piece of paper fluttering down. And I was experimenting how to do it. If I can just have a piece of paper here, any old piece. Um, taped to the end of a rod, there's all kinds of different choices that a puppeteer can make. Is it going to flutter like a leaf? Is it going to sort of flip and flip and flip and flip and flip? And it depends on the weight of the paper. It depends on how it's taped, all kinds of different things. And I was figuring out the best way to do it. And what I found was that if I was twisting the rod in my fingers as it went, it kind of had this flippity, 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 flippity as it descended. That's what I settled on. And little did I know, Jerry Juhl had been watching all of my trials and errors, standing beside me, watching me sort of figure this out. And when I turned and saw, and he kind of caught me in the act of playing and experimenting, he just said, "Wow, that's amazing." Well, thank you, sir. I'm doing my best here. It was really neat to be acknowledged by him. He was a very generous and gentle guy. Yeah.
And now that you know he was a puppeteer, he had his reasons to coach you that way.
I know. I thought that was great. Um, I also remember, I mean, this was 1984. Okay, so we're talking the early days of word processors. Right? He and the other writers were upstairs with the executive producers and the accountants, upstairs from where the studios were. That's where their offices were. And I'd never seen computers before, let alone anything. I mean, we didn't even have laptops back in these days. Everyone had a desktop computer. I think the early Macs is what they were using. And I was looking over Jerry's shoulder one time as he was punching a single button and an entire word would appear. These are the earliest versions of Microsoft Word where they could program a shortcut into a key command. I didn't know that. So he took the time to explain what that was. I've programmed these shortcuts and these prompts so I can push this and it says Wembley. I can push that and it says Boober, and I don't have to type it out the whole time. Wow, that's neat. So I didn't know.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, well, there's different ways to do it now. And I'm sure that Microsoft Word has figured it all out for us by now.
Mm.
But back in those days, it was probably a sequence of commands that you had to almost have to go back and learn DOS to even figure out. The early days of computing, these guys were on top of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
So being an early Muppet fan from the start, and
Yeah.
we've been talking about Frog Prince, early Sesame Street, Ed Sullivan Show, and a lot of these old school commercials as well. Jerry performed in some of those, and probably, I wouldn't be surprised, wrote some of those as well. Just knowing that at the time he was like the go-to Muppet writer. Um, do you remember some of your first ever exposures to the Muppets?
Yes, I do. If it wasn't those early TV specials like Frog Prince and Bremen Town Muppet Musicians of Bremen and all that, then certainly it was the first few seasons of Sesame Street when I was still just a young kid, young enough to be watching Sesame Street.
Who says there's an age limit to watching Sesame Street? Come on.
Well, I know, and I was reading Oz books until I was a teenager, but my friends used to make fun of me for that, so who knows?
Screw the haters.
Yeah, 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 that's right.
Of
Haters
course,
gonna hate.
this is before social media, so you never knew who the haters were.
That's right, exactly.
Hmm.
I was 7 years old the first season of Sesame Street, and I remember being so fascinated by the puppets and so entertained by the puppets. That's the reason I kept on watching. That's the reason my friends were making fun of me during my teenage years, is that I was still going home for lunch and watching Sesame Street. No,
Hey,
you guys
I would have
don't
done that
understand.
too.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. So I was hooked early. That's it. Yeah. But
Hmm.
I wouldn't have known the name of Jerry Juhl until my grandmother bought me that great big coffee table book of Muppets and Men. Do you know the book?
I do. I don't have it, but I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, that's where uh, all those very revealing photographs and behind the scenes stories, and that's where I learned the word indefatigable, because that was the word that was used to describe Jerry Hunt back in those days. And that's where there's pictures, of course.
Jerry Nelson.
No, Jerry. Sorry, Richard Hunt. Richard Hunt. The
I mean, they were close,
indefatigable
so
Richard Hunt.
that's an
Yeah,
easy
yeah.
mistake.
And in a lot of those behind the scenes photos is as pictures of Jerry Juhl, young Jerry Juhl on the set hanging around.
Mm.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that I asked Craig, but it was something that I talked to him about before he and I started recording the first half of this retrospective. But it's been 20 years, and that's why I'm making this video. It's been 20 years since we lost Jerry Juhl.
Right.
Do you remember that moment that it happened?
I do remember that moment. More specifically, I remember the weeks leading up to that moment. I mean, the moment was a surprise. Oh my God, we lost Jerry. The reason I was so surprised is because not very long before that, he had sent me an email.
Oh, wow.
I know. I don't have the email anymore. That's several computers ago and several different email addresses ago.
Yeah, and I mean, now if you still had it, you could get it transferred more easily than you could back then.
Yeah, no, it's lost to the mists now, unfortunately. Um, but the reason he wrote to me is because I was doing a Fringe show, Toronto Fringe 2005, a remount of the one-man show that I was performing in Nova Scotia back in the 90s. It was a one-man show all about my experience on Fraggle Rock, etc. It was a show called Don't Get Me Started. I wrote it. My friend Marianne Ward directed it, and Terry Angus made my puppet for. I recreated my audition for the Muppets. It was a neat show, and I enjoyed it. 10 years later, I decided to remount it here in Toronto to see if it would make any kind of a splash. And I sent a bunch of emails out to anyone who I thought might be interested. I didn't even care where they lived. And one of the emails I sent to Jerry Juhl. Jerry, I know you're in California, but listen, I'm doing a show for the Fringe. I talk a lot about Fraggle Rock and Jim Henson, and I would just be delighted if you could somehow make it up to come to the show. Well, he couldn't make it up to come to the show, and I understand that, but he did take the time to reply to my email. Mike, so good to hear from you. I see Trish Leeper down in California sometimes because she travels with her theater troupe. It's always so nice to keep in touch with former Fraggle and our Canadian friends. Do keep in touch. I can't come to your show. A very friendly, warm email. So for him to die not long after that was really quite unexpected and very, very sad. And I know that Larry Merkin talked about Jerry after that quite a lot. Larry was a real fan of Jerry Juhl and a real admirer of Jerry Juhl. As Jerry Juhl is probably still on Larry's mind. You should reach out to Larry.
Hmm. I'll remember that.
Yeah.
So to wrap it up, you said that the first time you met Jerry was in those early production meetings of Fraggle
Yeah.
Rock, and he would just
Yeah.
be cracking up laughing at all of these jokes. Kind of makes me wonder. I ask Muppet writers stuff like this a lot. There's not many Fraggle Rock writers that I've had on the show. I don't think any at all. I've interviewed from Sesame Street Norman Stiles, Lou Berger, Chris Surf, Emily Kingsley, Luis Santiro. And the question that I always ask them is, did you have any favorite characters to write for? Do you know if Jerry had any favorite Fraggle characters of his own, either to write for or just in general, or characters that like made him laugh?
I don't know. I shouldn't
Okay.
really say because I would just be guessing blindly.
Okay.
But that being said, if I was to guess, I would guess Wembley.
Given the fact that he gave Wembley his own language.
That's right. Yeah, I would guess Wembley.
hmm
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for coming back to Nostalgia Talk 5 years later and
I know.
celebrating a legend with me and all of our listeners.
Well, you're doing really well with the show. I am just so pleased and impressed that it's going and that you're keeping it going. So good on you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You
And
bet.
to all of our listeners and viewers, also, I want to thank Craig Shemin for coming back to the show. Make sure to, I'm going to plug it again, make sure to buy his new book, the Sam and Friends script book. This is not it, but this is its predecessor, but the new one is coming out or out, depending on when anybody's watching this. If you guys are watching it after the fact, then the book is out, and maybe some of you guys have read it. There's a few Jerry Juhl scripts in there as well. Craig told me that as we were preparing for this.
Nice.
So a big thank you to Craig and Mike for coming back to Nostalgia Talk. A big thank you to you guys for coming here to celebrate Jerry Juhl with us. And on this day, to commemorate Jerry, don't mourn the fact that he's gone. Be silly. It's what he would have wanted. If you're setting the table at dinner for your family, do something funny. If you're going for a walk and you feel like you're about to stumble, do it. If you're too shy to say the word hello, just make up some kind of goofy language. You'd be surprised how a little bit of silliness can really make a difference on somebody. So I want to thank you guys for being a part of this, and even though he's no longer with us, a big thank you to Jerry Juhl from all of us Muppet fans, just for having a lasting impact on us. So I will see you next time. I've got some exciting Halloween stuff ready. By now, my first of the Halloween retrospectives, Scooby-Doo, is now out. So I'll see you
Nice.
next time. Peace out.